My name is Matt, and I grew up in northern Minnesota. People who haven't lived here don't understand what winter really is. It isn't the soft snowfall you see in movies or the cozy holiday warmth you feel in December. It's an entire season built out of silence, white skies, and a cold so deep it feels like it crawls under your skin. Winters here bury entire vehicles, swallow roads, and erase the world until it's just you, your home, and whatever the storm decides to bring with it. The night this happened, I was 14. It was early January, and everyone in the county was warning each other about a massive blizzard moving in. Schools shut down early. Power crews were already prepping. Even Dad, who almost never worried about weather, had filled up the tub with water just in case. When the storm finally hit, it felt like the entire house trembled with each gust of wind. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the siding creak. Snow kept slamming against the window so hard it felt like handfuls of gravel. Eventually, I drifted off until a noise yanked me back awake. It was a metallic banging, not just one, repeated, sharp, echoing through the storm like someone was hitting a steel pipe with a hammer. I sat up in bed, listening. At first, I thought maybe something had come loose on the house, but the banging wasn't from the walls. It was coming from farther away, from the yard, from the direction of the shed. Before I could decide whether to get up, I heard my bedroom door open. My older brother, David, stood in the hallway, shoulders tense, looking toward the back of the house. "You're hearing that, right?" he asked quietly. I nodded, grabbing my slippers and following him. Another metallic hit rang out through the storm, even louder than before. It sounded like something was trying to get inside the shed. David grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I remember thinking he looked nervous, even if he tried not to show it. I was terrified we'd open the door and find someone trying to break in. But the banging didn't sound like a person. It sounded heavier, more desperate, more frantic. David opened the back door, and a wall of cold air rushed in like a wave. The wind shoved against us immediately, throwing snow directly into our faces. Even with the flashlight, the yard was almost invisible, just white and shifting shadows. We stepped outside anyway. Each step felt like dragging my legs through wet cement. The snow was almost up to my shins already, and the storm made it hard to keep my eyes open. The flashlight beam kept flickering, fighting against the wind, barely piercing through the blizzard. The banging stopped when we were about halfway across the yard. For a second, neither of us moved. The sudden quiet was somehow worse than the clanging. Then, a different sound drifted through the storm, a slow, scraping noise near the shed. A dragging sound, rough, uneven, like something was pulling itself across frozen wood. David lowered the flashlight to the ground and swept it back and forth as we approached. Snow distorted everything, making even familiar shapes look wrong. But as we got closer, I saw something darker near the bottom of the shed door. At first, I thought it was just a drift of snow piled strangely, but then it shifted. It looked like a body hunched low to the ground, something long stretched behind it, but bent in the wrong direction. Its back rose and fell in stiff, unnatural motions like it was trying to figure out how to breathe. "What is that?" I whispered. David didn't answer. He stepped closer and raised the flashlight. When the beam hit it, the shape reacted immediately. Its head snapped toward us, and I saw the full shape of its face. Its skin was a pale, frozen gray, stretched too thin across a skull-like frame. Snow clung to it like dust. Its eyes were hollow, almost empty, but reflected just enough light to give the impression that they were staring directly at us. And its mouth was open, hanging in a silent, unnatural way, like the cold had frozen the jaw in that position. I remember thinking it looked like a mask, like something wearing the idea of a face rather than having one. Before either of us could move, it began crawling toward us. It didn't stand, it didn't limp, it crawled, throwing its arms forward in frantic lunges. Its elbows dug deep into the snow, and it dragged the rest of its body behind like its legs didn't work at all. The speed of it was horrifying, too fast for something moving that way. I tried to shout, but nothing came out. It wasn't until David grabbed my jacket and yelled, "Run!" that my body reacted. We sprinted back across the yard, stumbling, slipping, pushing against the storm that seemed determined to hold us in place. I could hear the thing behind us, scraping, dragging, hitting the snow unevenly but moving fast enough to close the distance. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We reached the porch, slammed the door shut, and locked it with shaking hands. Both of us stood there in silence, listening. The storm raged on outside, but the scraping stopped just short of the house. We waited and waited, but nothing else happened. The thing didn't approach the windows, didn't climb the stairs, didn't hit the walls. The storm swallowed every trace of sound. We stayed awake until morning. Dad had no idea we'd even gone outside. When he went out to check for damage the next day, he called us over to the shed. Something was sticking out of a mound of snow near the door. He brushed it off with his boot until the shape became clear. It was a wolf, frozen solid, thin enough to see its ribs through the skin. Its body was twisted into a position that didn't look like something that had just curled up and died. Its neck was bent too sharply. Its legs were stretched out in different directions. It probably froze. During the storm, Dad said, brushing off more snow. Wind must have dragged it around. Poor thing. David and I exchanged a look. I walked around the wolf slowly and noticed something in the snow. Drag marks, long, uneven grooves. They started at the tree line and led directly to the shed. But they didn't look like paw prints. They looked like something pulled itself forward, leaving only 2 deep tracks instead of 4, and there were no prints leading away. Dad crouched down to take a closer look. "You boys hear anything last night?" he asked. The truth sat like a rock in my throat. David answered for both of us. "Just the wind." Dad accepted it without question, but I couldn't stop staring at the wolf's face, the frozen snout, the open mouth, the pale eyes. It wasn't identical to the thing we saw, but it was too close for comfort, like something had worn it, like something had been inside it. For days, I couldn't sleep without imagining that crawling figure dragging itself toward the shed, wearing the shape of a starving wolf, trying to move in a body that didn't belong to it. Sometimes, even now during winter storms, I swear I hear that same dragging noise outside, the slow pull of something pulling itself through deep snow, looking for warmth, looking for movement, looking for anything alive. And every time the wind gets loud enough to scream, I check the yard, I check the shed. I check the snowbanks near the tree line, just to make sure nothing is pulling itself toward the house again. My name is Kevin, and this happened in northern Idaho during a winter that people still talk about. Temperatures dropped so low that trees cracked in half overnight. Power lines froze solid. Roads disappeared under 6 feet of snow. If you went outside after dark, it felt like the cold was alive and watching you. My family owned a small cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't fancy, just 1 bedroom, a propane stove, and a generator that only worked when it felt like it. Dad mainly used it during hunting season, but in the winter, it stayed empty. Nobody wanted to go up there when the roads turned to ice, except my uncle. He was stubborn, old school, and insisted he didn't need help or company. Every December, like clockwork, he'd spend 2 or 3 nights up there to clear his head. We all thought it was odd, but it was his place, so no one argued. Last winter, he didn't come back. Dad got worried after 3 days passed with no call. By the 4th day, he told me to get my coat, chains for the truck, and a tow rope. We were heading up the mountain to find him. The drive was awful. Snow drifted across the road, hiding patches of ice underneath. The forest around us looked dead. Trees weighed down with frost, branches frozen solid. No signs of animals anywhere. The cold wasn't just temperature. It felt like a pressure inside the air, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. After hours of crawling uphill, we finally reached the long, narrow path that led to the cabin. The truck barely made it through. Snow had piled high on both sides, like walls. But when we reached the clearing, something immediately felt wrong. The cabin's front door was open, not wide open, just cracked, barely an inch. But for my uncle, that was the equivalent of leaving the entire house unlocked with a sign that said, "Come in." Dad put the truck in park and stared at the cabin for a few seconds before getting out. The cold was worse up there, sharper, like the wind had teeth. Snow blew across the clearing in thin sheets, and even through all that white, something stood out. A dim light was still on inside the cabin. Dad muttered, "Generator shouldn't be running this long." He called out for my uncle. No response. We walked to the door, both of us stepping lightly, like we didn't want to disturb something. The moment Dad pushed the door open, a wave of warm, stale air hit us. The lantern on the table was flickering weakly. The room looked exactly like how my uncle left it every winter. Coat hung by the hook, boots by the stove, coffee mug on the counter. But he wasn't there. Dad walked to the bedroom, checked the bathroom, checked outside behind the cabin. Nothing. Maybe he went to look for help, I said. Dad shook his head. Look at this. He pointed to the coat by the door. It was my uncle's heavy winter jacket, the one he never went anywhere without. His boots were dry and untouched. His gloves were hanging, on the hook. He hadn't left the cabin. He hadn't even gotten dressed to go outside. It was like he just vanished in the middle of whatever he was doing. Dad rubbed his forehead and said he was going to check the generator shed. He told me to stay inside and look for any note or sign of what happened. I wish I had listened. Instead, curiosity dragged me outside. I followed his footprints around the cabin toward the back, but as I walked, something strange caught my attention in the snow. Deep grooves, not footprints, not tire tracks. They ran from the edge of the tree line straight toward the cabin, like something had been dragged or had crawled on its belly. They were wide, maybe 2 feet across, and whatever made them had pushed the snow down so hard that ice glistened at the bottom of the trails. I crouched down to touch the snow. It was almost carved out, as if something with massive weight had slid through it. Dad called my name from the generator shed, pulling me out of my thoughts. He was standing beside the shed door, staring at the ground. You need to see this, he said quietly. Behind the shed, the snow wasn't smooth. It was churned up in violent patterns, scattered, uneven, torn apart. Something had thrashed there, something big. Trees surrounding the area had bark scraped off in long, claw-like lines, but not clean ones, more like deep gouges made by something rigid and heavy. Dad kept scanning the woods, jaw tight. Then he pointed to the ground again. Blood, not a pool, just small droplets, scattered like something had been carried or dragged. An animal got him, I whispered, but I didn't believe it. No animal made those tracks. Nothing we knew crawled like that. Dad grabbed my arm. We're going back to the cabin. We'll call search and rescue. Stay close. As we walked back, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The woods felt too quiet, too empty. The cold stung my eyes and made everything blur slightly at the edges. Inside the cabin, I shut the door and locked it, even though Dad told me that wouldn't do much against wildlife. He was about to radio for help when something thumped softly against the outside wall. Then again. We froze. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was a slow, dragging thump, like something brushing or leaning against the siding. Dad lowered the radio. The thumps continued, circling from the side of the cabin toward the back. He put his finger to his lips and moved toward the window, very slowly lifting the curtain just enough to see outside. I stepped beside him. At first, all I saw was snow blowing across the clearing. Then something darker moved between the trees. It slid, not walked. It slid across the snow as if its body was pulling itself forward without using legs. The shape looked long, stretched, hunched low to the ground. Every few feet, its body rose and fell like it was struggling to push itself along. Then the head lifted. A pale, almost human-shaped face looked toward the cabin. I could barely make out the features, but the eyes weren't right. They were sunken in, dark, and unfocused, like they were searching for warmth or movement or anything alive. Dad grabbed the lantern and turned it off, plunging the cabin into darkness. We both backed away from the window, hearts pounding so hard I could feel mine in my throat. The dragging sound came again, closer this time, moving along the side of the cabin. Snow scraped beneath something heavy. I could hear it press against the wall, shifting its weight as if trying to understand the structure. Dad mouthed, "Stay quiet." The thing moved slowly, methodically, circling the cabin. Every few seconds, there was a pause, like it was listening. Then the door handle shifted. I nearly gasped. Dad grabbed the handle and held it tight, bracing his weight against it. The metal twisted softly like something was exploring it from the outside, testing it, learning it. After what felt like an hour, the pressure stopped. The dragging moved again, farther away this time. Eventually, the sound faded until there was nothing but wind against the windows. We waited almost an hour before Dad said we were leaving everything behind. We kept the lights off, packed nothing, and made a run for the truck the moment we thought it was safe. I swear I heard something moving in the woods while the engine warmed up, a slow, shifting movement between the trees. We called search and rescue the moment we got home. They searched for days. They found nothing. No trace of my uncle, no body, not even his footprints. Just those strange, wide drag marks that stopped abruptly at the clearing as if whatever made them had slipped under the snow and disappeared. Dad refuses to go back to the cabin. We still own it, but the keys sit untouched in a drawer no one opens. Sometimes, during the coldest nights of winter, the same thing happens. Something in the woods moves without footsteps. Something heavy drags itself through the snow. Something searches the darkness for a warm place to crawl toward. And to this day, the light inside the cabin still flickers at night, even though no one is there to turn it on. My name is Lucas, and I used to work seasonally as a ranger's assistant at a small wilderness station in northern Montana. Most of my job was easy, checking cabin logs, monitoring trails, clearing snowdrifts after storms. It was peaceful, almost boring at times. Winter slowed everything to a crawl up there. But one winter night changed the way I think about the woods forever. The station sat at the edge of a long, frozen lake with dense pine forest wrapping around it like a wall. In winter, the snow piled high against the trees, smoothing the whole landscape into a white, silent maze. The cabins we monitored were scattered along a narrow service trail about 3 miles into the woods. In decent weather, it was a simple walk. In January, it was exhausting. One night, just after 9, we lost radio contact with one of the remote cabins, Cabin 3. Usually, dropped communication wasn't a big deal. The old equipment failed constantly. But the ranger I worked under, Marcus, was uneasy. Earlier that day, a pair of cross-country skiers had come through, telling him they heard something strange in the forest, something like low humming. They insisted it wasn't wind. Normally, Marcus would have brushed it off, but he sent me to check anyway. He handed me a lantern, his backup radio, and a thermos of coffee before telling me to stay on the trail no matter what. It was snowing lightly when I left the station, the kind of quiet snowfall that makes sound feel muted, like everything is wrapped in cotton. The deeper I got into the forest, the more it felt like I was walking into an entirely separate world. About halfway to the cabin, the snow suddenly stopped. Not gradually. It just quit. The sky turned strangely clear and still, the tree branches motionless, the air heavy and unmoving. That alone was eerie. Storms never cut off that sharply. I tried calling Cabin 3 on the backup radio, but all I got was soft static, like whispering through fabric. I kept walking. When I reached the cabin, I immediately saw something was wrong. The front door was open just an inch, and there was a thin line of snow pushed inside, like it had been left ajar for hours. The cabin was dark, and the wood around the doorframe had small splinter marks, almost like fingernails had dragged across it. I stepped inside and called out for the renter, an older guy from Idaho who was staying 2 nights. There was no answer. His bag was still there, unzipped on the bed. His boots were missing. The lantern he rented was gone too. The stove was warm though, which meant he'd been there not long ago. When I stepped back outside, I saw footprints in the snow leading away from the cabin. They were deep and clear, unburied by snowfall because the storm had stopped so suddenly. But something was strange about them. They weren't spaced right, too far apart like the person had been taking unnaturally long strides. And after about 20 feet, the footprints stopped. Not faded, not covered. Stopped. They ended at the edge of the trees where the forest grew too tightly packed together for anyone to walk through easily. It didn't make sense. No one could have just vanished into the trees without leaving more tracks. As I stood there staring at the abrupt end of the trail, I noticed something else. A faint glimmer deeper in the woods, a tiny point of bluish-white light, then another, and another. They were spaced far apart, almost evenly, barely visible between the branches. At first I thought they were a reflection from the moon, but they were too bright, too focused, and they were moving, slowly, almost pulsing. I should have turned around right then and gone back to the station. But something about those lights pulled me in, like a tug in my stomach urging me forward. I stepped off the trail, pushing branches aside as I walked deeper into the trees. The lights didn't get brighter or dimmer. They stayed the same distance ahead of me, flickering softly like they were waiting for me. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. Even my footsteps felt muffled. The air grew colder, so cold it stung my lungs. The trees began to thin, opening into a small clearing. And that's where I froze. The lights were hovering above the snow, not attached to anything. Not lanterns, not reflections, not fireflies. Just floating orbs of pale blue light, the size of golf balls, all swaying gently like they were suspended in water. I stood there staring at them, hypnotized. The air around the clearing felt wrong, heavy, pressured, like standing too close to a power transformer. My skin tingled. My eyes felt stretched. A faint hum vibrated through the ground. That's when I noticed the snow below the lights. It was disturbed, like something large had been dragged through it. Not walked, dragged. Long, sweeping marks, deep in some places and shallow in others, circling the clearing like something had been thrashing or writhing around. I took one step closer. A sudden whisper of movement flickered behind me. I turned sharply, raising my lantern. Something was standing at the tree line. Tall, very tall. A silhouette that didn't match any human shape, too lanky, too still. Its arms hung lower than they should have. Its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach flip. I couldn't see its features, just the outline, but the lights behind me intensified, glowing brighter, almost reacting to it. The thing stepped forward, not walking, sliding. The legs moved, but not right, bending in ways joints shouldn't bend, shifting like its bones weren't fixed in place. Its arms dragged slightly behind it, like they were too heavy. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing, as if the light from the orbs created a boundary it couldn't cross. It didn't make a sound. It just watched me. Something about it felt old. Not ancient, but unnatural. Like it didn't belong in the world I lived in. The orbs dimmed suddenly. The boundary of light weakened. The creature stepped forward. I turned and ran. Branches whipped against me as I tore through the woods, not caring if I was off trail. Behind me, I heard something shifting through the snow, smooth, fast, too fast. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how close it was. The forest around me began to darken unnaturally fast, like the night was folding in on itself. My breath burned in my chest. My legs felt like they were giving out. Every instinct in me screamed that something was right behind me. I burst out of the trees and onto the service trail just as the sky flickered with distant lightning, illuminating everything in a sharp flash. For that split second, I saw it, standing just inside the tree line, watching me. The lights behind it were gone. I ran all the way to the station. Marcus knew something was wrong the moment I stumbled inside. I was pale, shaking uncontrollably, barely able to get words out. When I finally told him what happened, I expected him to laugh or brush it off. He didn't. He just went quiet. Too quiet. Then he said, "You weren't supposed to go into the trees." We reported the missing man the next morning. Search teams came out. They found no footprints, no drag marks, no signs of struggle. The snow in the clearing was untouched, like nothing had ever been there. But that night, as we sat in the station reviewing cabin logs, the radio crackled. A faint whisper of static came through. Then, a voice, weak, disoriented. "I'm still here. The lights, don't follow them. The signal cut off." We never heard it again. And cabin 3 has been kept closed every winter since. Sometimes when the sky goes clear too suddenly after a storm, I think about those floating blue lights. And I wonder if the man from cabin 3 ever really disappeared, or if he's still wandering somewhere out there in the dark, following them deeper and deeper into the trees.